Hello there, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Library News. I am your friendly librarian, and this week we're not diving into any weighty topics or in-depth discussions. We're going to keep it light this week. So as you probably already know, in a couple of weeks we got Halloween coming up. It is one of my favorite times of year, and if you enjoy celebrating Halloween, you're probably starting to get into the spirit now with some scary movies, watching them late at night with all the house dark, and also enjoying scary books. And you know, everybody's got a different take on that. Some people say that books can't be as scary, you know, because there's certain limitations compared to a movie, right? When you've got a horror movie, you get the jump scare aspect, you know, where like the camera's moving and you know something behind them and then it turns and jumps out at you. Right, that was terrifying. But books are scary in a different way because you're reading them, you get involved with them, your mind really gets wrapped up, and they can scare you on a deeper level. So I just wanted to share with you some of my favorite new and classic horror books that we have in the library. Let's get started. Alright, first up, we have got a modern classic. It's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. Pictured here is the graphic novel version, but we also have the regular novel as well as its 4 sequels. It is a 5-book series. So in this book, Jacob grows up with his grandfather telling him stories of his fantastic childhood at Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and shows him pictures of these children with gifts, abilities, abnormalities. And Jacob, as he gets older, figures it's just a forgery. It's just made up to entertain him when he was a kid. Well, when his grandfather passes, he decides to go find out for himself and explore this part of his grandfather's life and see what truth there is. When he arrives there, though, the question is whether or not Jacob is ready to face the mysterious truth. Next up, we're going to talk about a couple of the giants of the horror genre for our generation and even the generation before ours. The first of which, no surprise, is Stephen King. We do have a bunch of Stephen King books in the library, including It, The Shining, Dr. Sleep, and other classics, but the one that I want to share with you today is a slightly lesser known one called Salem's Lot. So in Salem's Lot, Ben Mears is a struggling writer, and he thinks that in order to, you know, get his mojo back and complete his new story, he's going to move back home to the town of Jerusalem's Lot, and an old mansion there which has, you know, many ghost stories and tall tales told about it. He doesn't put much stock in that until 2 boys go venturing off into the woods. Only one comes back alive, and they start to realize that perhaps there is something sinister that lurks in the woods. You'll have to read to find out more. So, Dean Koontz is another writer who, in the horror genre, who's been writing for about the same amount of time as Stephen King, has written as many books and bestsellers. He's not quite as well known in popular culture because Stephen King's books have been made into movies for years, whereas Dean Koontz, that's really not the case. But he is on par as a writer. In fact, I prefer Dean Koontz to Stephen King. He was my favorite writer when I was in high school, and this was one of my favorite books. So it's called By the Light of the Moon. So in this book, Dylan and Shep are brothers. Shep has autism, and Dylan helps to take care of him. And one night they're going down the street, and a mad scientist comes out of nowhere and injects them with an unknown substance and tells them that they're on their own and not even the police can help them now. They find a woman, Jillian Jackson, who's never really had a concern in her life except for maybe finding the right guy. She's also been injected, and Dylan convinces her that they should stick together when suddenly they're accosted by a group of armed men in a black Suburban pulling up on them. So they're on the run, but they do not know from whom. And as they go on, they start developing mysterious powers, including premonitions to see crimes before they happen. And so the question for them becomes, how can they use these powers to stop the evil that is around them and to escape those who are trying to hunt them down? Great, thrilling, suspenseful story by the light of the moon. We've also got some great classic horror books in this library, including Bram Stoker's Dracula, a Gothic novel that is the definitive early vampire story. We've got the collections of Edgar Allan Poe, who's a master of suspense and terror. And we all just recently this year got The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Which there's also a film by the same name based on this book. So in this story, 4 complete strangers arrive at Hill House at the invitation of Dr. Montague, who's an occult scholar. So he studies the paranormal and supernatural, and he's trying to capture evidence of the supernatural and psychic abilities. So he invites these 4 people to this haunted house, and as they grapple with the strange and terrifying things they encounter, nothing can prepare them for what lies ahead, because the Hill House is just gaining its power. So what's really fascinating is the story behind the story of Frankenstein. Mary Shelley, before she was known as an author or published or anything like that, she was young, she was vacationing with a couple of friends, her husband, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron, both of whom were very well-known and respected authors, especially poets themselves. So the 3 of them were vacationing, and one night they got rained out, so there's really nothing to do. They were stuck in the house, hanging out around the fire, and they decided to play a little game. So since each of them was a creative storyteller, they were each to come up with their own ghost story or scary story to tell, and whoever told the best story would win the game. So this is actually where Mary Shelley developed the idea for Frankenstein in the story that she told. They loved it so much that they convinced her to write it out as a novel, and that was her first published novel and earned her place in history. Well, there's a new novel that's out now called Strange Star, which revisits this night, which actually happened, but then adds onto it a new person, a mysterious girl who arrives at this party of 3 with scars on her arms, with her own story to tell. But as she's telling the story, she reveals a secret that turns the threat very real. Strange Star. Lastly, I want to talk about some of our story collections. We've got a lot of great collections of short stories that are scary. So some of them are by a single author. For instance, Everything's Eventual by Stephen King. He writes 14 different short stories for your enjoyment. Then there's books like Scream and Scream Again, which was edited by R.L. Stine, the author of the Goosebumps series, but includes each story is written by a different author. As I said, collections from Edgar Allan Poe. So some of them are modern, some of them are classic, all sorts of great collections. And the one I want to highlight for you is called Victorian Ghost Stories by Eminent Women Writers. So really, the title says it all as for what this book's shtick is. It does include stories from Charlotte Bronte and other great authors of that time period, each sharing their own spooky stories. Alright, so thank you everybody for watching. I hope I've grabbed your interest, and perhaps you will want to try out one of these books or one of the other great horror books that we have here in the library to get you into the spirit of spooky season. Ooh! This is your scary librarian signing out, saying peace out. See you next week.